Well, hello, everybody. My name is Simon Wright. I'm the Director of Programming here at Japan House London. And welcome to today's event, Living with Trees, in conversation with Makino Yoshiyuki and Kevin Martin. So today's event is actually being live streamed, and we're delighted also to be joined by an online audience on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And the event is being recorded, and the recording will be archived on our social media platforms following the event. So you'll be able to watch it later as well and tell your friends about it as well. So today we are delighted to welcome Makino Yoshiyuki, who's a researcher and furniture craftsman, and Kevin Martin, who is head of tree collections at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And also we have Bethan Jones, who will be interpreting for us today. Thank you very much, Bethan. So a brief introduction of our two guests, and then we will go into a presentation format through conversation between both Makino-san and Kevin. So Makino Yoshiyuki is a researcher and furniture craftsman and interior coordinator. And in 2011, he established Makino Woodworks, and since 2013 has continued to make furniture with oak sourced in Hida. Since 2019, Makino-san has been studying medicinal properties of trees under Abe Kurayuki, and recently in cooperation with the Gifu Prefecture Institute of Human Life Technology has been conducting analysis of wood extracts. As a result of the research, in 2020, he launched Cure Furnishing with the intention of increasing understanding of the natural benefits of the use of wood. And Kevin Martin is head of tree collections at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And in his role, he is charged with the curation and management of Kew's unique and historic collection of trees from around the globe for the purpose of scientific research and conservation within a UNESCO World Heritage Site landscape. His expertise includes how trees deal with changing climates and the benefits trees provide to society within the urban landscape. He is a track certified tree inspector. He also sits on several boards, including the Arboretum Advisory Committee for Westonbirt and Bedgebury. And Kevin is also the vice chair of the Arboricultural Subgroup for the Apprenticeship Trailblazer. He is also a member of the UK Botanic Garden and Arboretum Collections Consortium. So without further ado, will you join me in welcoming both Makino-san and Kevin? Thank you. So first of all, we'll start with some questions and a conversation between us, and there'll be an opportunity for people to answer questions at the end. So please do think of your questions as we go along. And also for those of us who are joining us on Zoom as well, thank you very much indeed. You'll have an opportunity as well if you send your questions through the question and answer section. So let me start maybe with Makino-san, if I may. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Firstly, what is your interest in trees? You're a researcher and a maker with wood.
はい。わかりました。高山市、私が住んでる岐阜県、日本の岐阜県高山市というところは 92% が、森林に覆われています。
So I live in a place called the Takayama city in Gifu Prefecture, and 92% of the region is forested.
そのような場所でずっと家具作りを始めたわけですけど、輸入材を使って、家具を作ってました。で、そういって周りが木いっぱいあるのになぜその木を使って家具を作ってないのかということに疑問を持ったのが最初のきっかけです。
That's where I started making furniture, and initially I was using imported wood, and I started thinking, there are so many trees here, why am I using imported wood? Why are we not using this local wood to make furniture? That's where my interest initially came from.
で、それからですね、興味持ったので、月2回、高山市では開催されている原木の市場があるんですけど、そこで自分でその地域の木材を買うようになりました。
And there is twice a month in Takayama, there is a wood market. So I started going there to purchase wood to use.
で、製材にも自分で立ち会ってどう切るのかっていうことを一緒に考えながら、木材と向き合ってきています。
I started going along to the sawmill to see how the wood is actually sawn and to think about different ways of doing that.
で、製材した材料は、今下にある写真のように、木材を外に積んで自然に乾燥させるっていうことを何年も行うようにしてます。
And for the last however many years it's been, I've been drying the wood outside, as you can see in this bottom photo.
で、そういった木材を使って家具ですね、キッチンだとか、椅子、テーブルなど、家の中に入れる道具をいろいろ作ってきてます。
And then I used that timber for building, for making kitchen cabinetry, for making tables and chairs and other furniture.
で、実際そういった木材を市場で買うようになったら、本当に樹木が育ってる場所っていうのがすごく興味が出てきて、で、実際にその現場に何度も足を運ぶようになります。
When I started buying the local wood from the market, I found myself getting interested in the place where these trees were actually grown and started visiting the forests.
で、実際こうやって見ていただくとわかるんですけど、木材市場に並んでる先ほどの木材っていうのはまっすぐで太くて枝がない、節がないものばかりなんですけど、実はこう山に入ると曲がってるものがあったり、枝がいっぱいあったりっていう、細いものだったりで、とにかくいろんな種類があるっていうことに気づきます。
At the market, you find thick trunks, you find trees with wood without knots, very straight, no branches. But when I went out to the forest, I realized that there is a whole lot of variety out there. There are trees with many branches, thinner trees, bendy trees.
で、実際その、大きく、太い木材は一番出るんですけど、それ以外のものっていうのは、紙の原料である木材パルプになったり、あとは、売れなかったり、手間がかかったりするものは山に放置されちゃったりしています。
The big fat trees make it to market, but the rest, either they are used for wood pulp, for paper, or if they can't be sold, or if they need too much work to get into a state where they can be sold, then they're just left on the mountainside.
実際その放置される木材も、全く無駄になっているわけではなくて、森の分解者である菌類やなんかに、分解されたりしながら虫の餌になったり住処になったりっていうことで生態系全体で考えれば無駄にはなってはないんですけど人の都合で切ったものなのでできるだけ長く使いたいっていうのが僕自身がその現場に行って感じたことです。
And even these trees that are left on the mountainside, they don't go to waste. The bacteria decompose them. They become food. They become accommodation for insects. So when you look at the ecosystem as a whole, they're not wasted. But where we people have cut the trees, I started to feel like we should be making use of them for as long as we can.
で、実際その広葉樹と針葉樹っていう2種類があるんですけど、広葉樹に関しては、根を掘り起こさない限り、また芽吹きます。なので、できればその木材として、ただ放置するだけじゃなくて、何か家の中とか室内に持ち込むことによって、分解者から遠ざけることによって、実際にその長く使う、資源として長く使うということが大事なんじゃないかということを常々感じるようになってきています。
you have two types of trees, broadleafs and conifers. And broadleaf trees, as long as you don't remove the roots, they will grow back. They can be coppiced. So these are good for using as a material, as wood. And I really started to feel like if we don't just leave them on the mountainside, if we bring them in, if we use them, we prolong that or postpone that process of decomposition, then we can actually make use of this material for longer.
実際その様子、僕が感じたことを、実際お客さんにも感じてもらうというか知ってもらうことは大切だなというふうに思っているので、最近ではその樹木のツアーというか森のツアーをやってます。で、実際にその場を見ていただいて、どういった環境で樹木が育つのか、家具がどういったものからできているのかということを知ってもらうということに取り組んでいます。
I also felt that I wanted my customers to understand this as well. So recently I've been doing forest tours with customers so they can see where the wood comes from, how their furniture starts out.
なので最近は、もう生態系全体をなんとなくこうイメージしながらものを作るというようなことに取り組んでいる状態です。
So recently, I really tried to have the whole ecosystem in mind when I'm making my furniture.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We've heard a little bit about Makino-san from Hida, but we also have Kevin with us here today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know a little bit about you only, I'm afraid. You joined as a climbing arborist in 2012, is that correct? But now, of course, you're head of tree collections. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do, and what we were talking a little bit about earlier was just how important Japan is to the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew.
Yeah, so as I was introduced, I started off as a climbing arborist. So I've had a bit of a different career path at Kew. Most people come in, study the Kew diploma, and they come through. I started my time as a commercial tree surgeon, and then in 2012 decided to go and work in Kew. I originally went to Kew, so I really loved climbing trees, and that's what I wanted to do. As time went on, things changed, and we all were change and adapt, and now I have a very interesting role as I'm in charge of curation. So when we look at woody collections, especially places like Kew, we're there for conservation, but also for scientific research. So a lot of my work now is looking at tree species and looking at the climate and how those trees interact. And we're doing a lot of modelling now, and it's really interesting because I've come from a practical side, come from being a practical person climbing trees. Now I use science to look at what we see and observe, and then back that up with science. So a lot of our work now, we use a lot of modelling. If you spoke to me 5-6 years ago and said I'd be sat behind a computer screen doing data modelling of climates and tree species, I've got, nah, you just want to climb trees. So it proves how we all change. So what we do now, we run lots of models. So we now know the annual temperature of what Kew Gardens is, and we now know the level of precipitation. And now we're building models to help us look at tree species which are going to be more appropriate to grow here in London, especially where we are in southwest London, going forward as climate change, as it makes its effects. We've only got to look at this summer. This summer is what we've been predicted for a long time. We are predicted to have these drought periods. And it's actually quite scary for myself personally that through the modelling data, we predicted that we would have warmer, wetter autumns, and that's exactly what we've got now. So this is a real key thing to lead into doing species selection. Kew as a collection, as with many tree collections from the time of the Victorian era, we used to go essentially stamp collecting. We would go off to different colonies, different countries, and we would go and collect trees because we wanted to display them. And that's where Kew had a very big influence in Japan in the early 1900s. So we had a very famous plant collector went through there that sent back lots of different species that make up all our gardens now. If we was just to plant English natives in our gardens, it'd be very boring. So a lot of the plants that everyone buys now in the garden centre, actually majority of those species, or a high percentage, come from Japan, and that's all led in through Kew. So when we was out in the early Victorian era, when the plant collectors were collecting, there was quite influential people like W.J. Bean, who was my position now. He was the curator, and he was the curator of the Arboretum, and he wrote extensively how these trees were growing once they come back from the seed collections. And we've built on that, and that's what the bones of Kew is to look, observe, and how these trees grow and the suitability of them moving forward into the urban landscape. So with this ever-changing climate, Kew's role sort of reinvented itself again. We've gone from where we started just collect species because we want to represent them, so we're akin to stamp collecting, but now we're looking again like W.J. Bean did, and look at trees and what we can grow and how well they're going to grow. So it's quite an exciting time. And we have, with Japan, because of we have such a large percentage of the species represented, we're now starting to try and identify specific ecotypes within Japan that are going to be more suited to London up to 2090 using data modeling.
Fantastic, thank you. What was interesting earlier on, I don't know if you've been to our exhibition already, which is about the woodworking techniques and materials from Hida Takayama, from where Makino-san is from himself. We have the accompanying booklet here, so please do go and visit if you haven't been already. But on page 10, we've listed 10 and 11, we've listed only 90 of the 350 or so species of tree which grow in Hida Takayama. And talking to Kevin earlier, you've got,
I reckon we have about 98% of that list represented within the gardens, rather than glass house under glass because they're frost sensitive, or as trees within the Arboretum. So that's how extensive the collections were through the early 1900s. And we've got mature original specimens. There's trees in this list, Abies homolepis. We've got original collections that go back to about 1890, and they're still growing in the Arboretum today. So it's really interesting. When I looked through this list, I was actually quite amazed about how much representation we have within our living collection.
and you've collected some yourself?
Yes, I've collected quite a few on them.
Including our Japanese big leaf magnolia.
Yes. So I've got it. That's one of the trees, one of the first trees we planted. It grows very fast in London. So it's already over 20 foot tall in the Arboretum. So the trip that was collected almost in 2013. It takes a long time. We have to treat the seed. So when we go out collecting, we bring tree seed back. And when that seed comes in, we then have to put it through a certain process in order to germinate it. It's not as simple as just sticking them in pots and letting them grow. A lot of the seed go through stratification. So we imitate winter by putting them in a freezer. And then sometimes some are on steam beds or benches which are warmed to then get the seed to germinate. So it's a very long process. So from collecting the seed, for it to be planted out into the Arboretum, you're looking between 5 and 7 years before we get to see it out in the Arboretum.
Wonderful, thank you. I think magnolia, Japanese big leaf magnolia, will play a little bit of a part in this afternoon's event as well later on. So please do look out for it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. Makino-san, if I may,
yes,
go back to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your interest in the beneficial or medicinal properties of trees which you've been researching?
はい。これが私が認識している樹木の主な活用を示したものです。で、特に、まず右上の、マテリアル、として、僕が家具をずっと作ってますので、一番馴染みのあるところですね。
So this slide shows the main uses of wood, in particular, the top left here, material. This is closest to my heart as a maker of furniture.
プラスチックが生まれる前は、日本でも多くの道具が、木で作られていました。
Before we had plastic in Japan, a lot of our everyday things that we used were made of wood.
最近ではどんどんそれがいろんな素材に変わりつつあります。
Now, of course, these things are made from a variety of materials.
で、一方でプロテクションってありますけど、樹木を、庭の生垣みたいなもの で植えてガード、侵入、人の侵入だとか動物の侵入を防ぐために使ったりしてますよね。
Wood was also used for protection in the form of hedges and fences built around habitations and gardens to stop people and animals coming in.
で、2つ目が、食べ物としてです。実を食べたり、日本でも葉っぱを、春先に天ぷらにして食べたりします。
Trees are also used for a source of food in the form of nuts and leaves, including the leaf tempura that we eat in the spring.
で、3番目が、観賞としてですね、庭に植えたり、実際鉢植えとして室内に持ち込んだり。で、最近では森林浴っていう言葉も有名になってきてますけど、主にこう見るというか視覚的な要素で、馴染みがある使い方です。
The third use is for appreciation. We grow trees in our gardens. We bring them indoors as houseplants. Recently, forest bathing has become very well known. So this is mainly about the visual appreciation of trees.
で、最後が、薬ですね。意外に本当に樹木、まあ植物全般ですけど、そういったものから多くの薬が作られています。そこに例として挙げてますけど、実際モルヒネだとかアスピリンだとかっていうものは実際植物由来のものです。
And then the final uses as medicine. Plants and trees provide us with a lot of medicines, for example, morphine and aspirin.
で、ここで一回化学成分というものについて触れておきたいんですけど、植物だとかを燃やした時にできる灰は無機物です。
If we look at some of the chemical components of trees, if you burn wood, you get ash, which is inorganic.
それ以外のものが有機物というふうになっています。
Everything else is organic.
実際に、樹木の場合だと、その形を構成する成分というものは共通してありますけど、それ以外のものが、種を、保存というか種を繁栄させるためにの成分であったり、自分を守るための成分というものが、2種類に分かれているという状態です。
There are some components that all trees share, the components that make the form of the tree. But there are other types, the second type of constituents within a tree that vary from variety to variety. These are the things that help that tree to reproduce and that protect that tree.
で、実際その薬として使われているのは、そういった樹木が自分の、身を守るためにとか、そういったもので活用している成分というものが主に使われています。
And when we use trees for their beneficial and medicinal properties, it's usually these components, the constituents that the tree uses to protect itself that we use.
で、実際4つに分けましたけど、実はこんな風なイメージで交わるところがあるっていうふうに思っているのが僕の考えです。
And I went through these 4 categories of uses for trees and for wood, but I see there are a couple of overlaps here.
で、私が主に関心を持っているのは青い丸印の部分。
And the one I'm mainly interested in is this blue dot.
で、実際一つ例を挙げますと、先ほどあったアスピリンっていうものなんですけど、それは柳という木のサリチンという成分から作られています。
One good example of this is aspirin, which is made from willow trees.
で、実際その柳の木の、木材を使って日本では昔から歯を掃除する爪楊枝というものをそれを使っています。
Now, willow wood has long been used in Japan to make toothpicks.
で、それは昔の人が、歯の痛みをそれで防ぐことができるということを知っていたからだっていうふうに言われています。
And this is said to be because people, but even back then in Japan, knew that using willow wood would prevent toothache.
なので、そういった昔からの木材の使い方から、新たな、そういった、化学成分という観点から見ると、すごく納得できるような使い方が他にもあるんじゃないかっていうふうに僕は考えています。
So I think if we look at traditional uses of wood, there are those that when we compare that to the chemical constituents of the wood will actually really make sense. And I'm sure there are other examples that we can find.
で、逆に、化学成分という観点から新しい使い方というものがまたできる、生まれるんだというふうに信じています。
And I also believe that if we look at those chemical components of wood, we will find other uses for it.
で、もう一つの緑の印の部分ですけど、
This green dot,
もう一つ僕のすごくこれからの関心事なんです。
this is something that I'm also very interested in and want to look into going forward.
生きた樹木が走っているものがどう人に影響するのかっていうところにすごく興味を持っています。
And this is about how the things that trees release affect us.
まあそれがもし本当に影響があるんだとすると、ガーデニングだとかランドスケープのデザインだとかそういったものにすごく影響するだろうと思ってまして、まあそのあたりはマーティンさんにぜひお聞き後で聞いてみたいというふうに思ってます。
Because I see that the properties that trees have and the elements that they release into the air could actually have an impact on the way we design our gardens and on landscape design. And this is actually something I'd really be keen to hear Kevin's opinion on.
No, yeah, definitely. So when we look at trees, how they affect us. You know, we all know the mental health benefits of going out for a walk. We all feel a lot better if we go and walk under trees. So they have that calming influence. But if we look at trees and what they provide for the climate and for us as urban dwellers, you know, if we don't have the urban canopy cover and we don't protect that urban canopy, we're going to be significantly impacted. Alone, just the trees' functions through respiration and how trees produce photosynthesis and photosynthase, the respiration from those trees. So when they're drawing water from the soil and when the leaves are functioning perfectly, they are respirating, and through that respiration will then cause natural cooling. And that's what not only does the shade cause cooling, but the respiration does as well. And that's why the urban canopy is going to become so important as we move forward. But there's other benefits as well. You got to look at the eco services, the green services that trees provide. So you got your shade, we've got respiration, but more importantly, the absorption of, you know, the carbon. And this is why it's a really interesting field to be involved with now with tree species selection, because if we can get the species selection right, we could then start using those trees need to have an end life. So if you listen to the news or many government directives now, they all talk about planting trees for carbon offsetting. That will work, but what we need to do is use skills to produce those trees into usable products like this table. If we don't do that, when trees go into decline and they start to die, and when fungi start to attack the heartwood, which is generally the natural process, what we would see, which is vitally important for the ecosystem, it's very different if you're planting trees to offset carbon, because as that tree goes into decomposition, it releases all that carbon that's stored back into the atmosphere. So then you're having a negative to your carbon offset in planting. So that's why we're starting to look and trying to discuss with especially urban tree managers that we need to have a replacement model where we take trees out just before they go into over maturity and then use that as a product. And that's why new techniques on how you can get wood to produce lovely furniture, construction industry, we should be using a lot more wood in all our societies, just like what Japan has done historically. We need to start looking at, it's a sustainable way to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, indeed, the three chairs we're sitting on are Hida Takayama chairs. They're beautifully, this is my favorite one, to be honest. This is extremely, it's usually upstairs on the ground floor. So please do and try it out later if you feel like it. Thank you very much. And you mentioned there about furniture and objects as well. and this is for Makino-san, if I may. Whereas you've outlined and the benefits of trees themselves, and I'm sure people are aware of that, hence what you mentioned, shinrin-yoku, for example, tree bathing. Not many people would know necessarily about the beneficial properties of wooden objects themselves and that they can have a similar effect. Could you shed some light on your research onto the benefits of wooden objects?
はい、わかりました。私が関心を持っているのは、その木材から出る揮発する成分です。
Yes, so my interest lies in what, not the trees, but the wood releases.
で、実際森林浴っていうのが人気になってますけど、あれもおそらくその樹木たちとか、他の、いろんな植物たちが出してる揮発成分に人が反応してるんだというふうに思ってます。
And I think the popularity of forest bathing is because people are responding to what it is that the trees and the plants are emitting.
で、その揮発成分を、我々が吸うことによって、生態系というかネットワークの中に人が入り込む。で、入り込んだことによって心地よさを感じてるんだっていうふうに僕は思ってます。
By breathing those in, we become part of the network. And that is, I think, a comfortable place for us to be.
で、実際、生きた樹木に関してはいろんな研究がされて、なんか出してるんだっていうことは言われ始めてるんですけど、木材、伐採されちゃった後のこういった木材から何か出てるっていうことはあんまり知られてない状態です。で、実際僕ら自身も加工をしてると香りとして感じるんですが、しばらくするとなくなってしまいます。
So there's research starting to be done into living trees and what it is that they release, but we're not very aware as yet of what is released by wood and by wooden objects. We know that we can smell the wood, but after a while that smell fades.
で、実際、皆さんの周りにある木製のものというのは、おそらくほとんどのものが塗装されてしまっているので、木材の匂いっていうことをあんまり意識することってないと思います。
Or a lot of the wooden objects that we use are painted or coated, which means that we're not aware of the smell.
で、実際私自身もどのぐらいの成分が出ているのかっていうのは全く想像できませんでした。
In fact, I myself really had no idea just how much wood releases.
で、実際、このような形で、日本の姫小松っていう樹木の木片を、ビニール袋の中というかサンプリングバッグの中に入れて24時間。で、そこの木材から出る揮発成分を分析しました。
So what I did was I took pieces of himekomatsu, Japanese white pine, put them into sample bags and left them for 24 hours before analyzing the air to see what constituents have been released by the wood.
で、実際これが、分析機器、クロマトグラフによって、検出された成分です。全部で28種類ありました。
This shows everything that the chromatograph picked up, 28 types altogether.
そのうち9種類は最新の機械でも成分が何かわからない。
There are actually 9 in there that even the latest technology didn't know what they were.
いかに多くのものを出しているかということがお分かりいただけると思います。
But this shows just how much is being released by the wood itself.
で、実際、私が、注目したのが、このボルニルアセイト、酢酸ボルニルっていう成分なんですけど、
What I'm particularly interested in here is the bornyl acetate.
これが、日本の九州大学で、すでに、睡眠の質を改善したり、肌質を改善するっていうことで基礎研究が行われていました。
Kyushu University in Japan has actually carried out research that shows that bornyl acetate has a beneficial effect on sleep quality and on skin condition.
で、これを知ったときに、もしかしたらこの木材を寝室だとか部屋の中に入れることによって、 睡眠の質を改善したりすることができるんじゃないかっていうふうに想像したんです。
And when I heard that, it got me thinking that maybe if we use this wood in the bedroom, it's going to have a beneficial effect on our sleep quality.
で、実際、大学の研究者だとか、分析をお願いする方に尋ねてみたんですけど、皆さんが口を揃えているのは、あまりにもわずか、微量なので、人は反応しないっていうふうに言われました。
So I asked some of the university researchers, and they all said there really isn't enough of it being released by the wood for it to have any effect.
いや、しかし、実際に、分析をしてもらったんです。無理やり。
So they analyzed it. I forced them to analyze it.
そしたら、その結果が今年の春、ようやく出ました。
And the results came out this spring.
で、これがその結果なんです。
And these are the results.
左側は匂いがわかる程度の濃度まで高めたもの。
So on the left-hand side, we have a higher concentration, a concentration that you can actually smell.
右側が、匂いはわからない、本当に低濃度のものです。
The left, on the right, is a very low concentration that you can't pick up by smell.
で、脳を鎮静化させるシーター波っていうものの動きを見ています。
And what we looked at was theta wave activity that shows the brain calming down.
で、実際、この結果が何を示しているかって言いますと、揮発している本当に低濃度のものに人が反応しているということがこれで初めて分かりました。
The results show that we actually respond to that very low concentration.
で、しかも、この結果が示しているのは、高濃度のものに対して脳は反応してないんです。
Whereas we're not responding to the higher concentration.
結局、私たちっていうのは、意識はしてなくても、脳はきちんと反応しているということが分かりました。
So it shows that even though we're not consciously aware of it, our brain is reacting.
この結果を考えれば、先ほど言った森林浴っていうのが、意味が、なんていうのかな。森林浴の効果がわかると思います。
Which really makes sense when you think about forest bathing and the way that affects us.
要は森に入って香りを感じるってことはほとんどないと思いますけど、私たちが気持ちがいいのは、こういった本当に低濃度の成分に反応しているんだっていうことだと、私は考えています。
Because when we go into the forest, we're not really smelling the wood, smelling the trees. But the reason it feels so good is because we're reacting to the low concentrations that the trees are releasing.
で、実際、これは一種類の成分だけを見てます。
And this is just one of those constituents.
でも実際の空間というのは様々なものの成分が揮発しています。
But the wood and the trees are actually emitting a whole range.
なので今後その一つ一つを見ていくっていうのは限界があるというふうに思っています。
I feel there's a limit to how far we will get by analyzing one at a time.
例えば人は DNA を解析してもうすべて分かったっていうことになってますけど、実際は人間というものがどうなのかっていうのは本当に分かってないですよね。一つ一つ見てっても結局は追い切れないというか、複雑な関係性を持っている中ではうまくそれを人間は理解できていません。
It's like DNA. We can analyze DNA and each individual part, but that doesn't mean we understand human beings because there's a complex relationship between all of them that means we'll never be able to see the whole just from looking at the parts.
で、それを解決するのに、私が考えているのは、この微生物を使おうということを考えています。
So one way that I think might work for analyzing these is using microorganisms.
で、これは、バイオセンサーと言われる技術です。
We call this biosensor technology.
微生物に、その成分を 複雑な入り混じった成分の中に微生物を入れてあげることによってその動きを見ます。
You let the microorganisms, you put the microorganisms in an environment containing these chemicals and see how they react.
その動きをいろんな情報を取って AI によって、データ解析することによってその環境を測定しようという試みです。
And then using artificial intelligence, you analyze the movements of the microorganisms to try and measure and analyze their environment.
で、現在試験的に行った単純な分析をしてるんですけど、それで分かっているのが、まず一つ目が樹木の種類の識別ができます。
We've carried out some simple analysis and understood a number of things. We've realized that we can differentiate between trees.
で、もう一つが、同じ樹木でも育った場所による違いを見分けることができています。
We can also use this technique to differentiate between the same tree variety grown in different regions.
で、あと三つ目が同じ原木、丸太、同じ木から分割した木材が同じかどうかというか、原木が同じかどうかが見分けられることが分かっています。
We can also use it to tell apart different samples of timber that come from the same variety of tree.
実際これをさらに拡大して、室内環境、こういった室内空気質のようなものに応用することができないかっていうのが私の今考えていることです。
So I'm thinking that we can maybe apply these techniques to analyzing indoor air quality.
こういったことにちょっともし興味がある方いらっしゃいましたら、ぜひ声をかけてください。
So if anyone is interested in this area of research, please let me know.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We also spoke a little bit earlier on about, for those of you who've been to the exhibition already, you'll see in our exhibition about woodworking in Hida, Takayama, something about the development of the zatsuboku, the miscellaneous natural forest, and the use of beech trees and how that's changed all the way through to the plantations of cryptomeria, for example. For you, Kevin, just if I may, can you tell us a little bit about the results of what have happened of humans shaping our natural environment and how trees themselves are adapting to things like involvement with, for the planting of trees, but also with how they deal with climate change?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Trees, through evolutions, they're, designed to survive. And what we're now doing, we have a lot more scientific research methods to understand how trees deal with climate. And a lot of trees now, we only have to look at this summer. We learned so many lessons this year as tree managers through how trees are going to adapt. So through this year was very unkind to trees. We had two stresses. We had a lot of heat stress, which we all were under, to be fair, but we also had drought stress. And now trees they rely on their hydraulic system. The whole function of a tree relies on the hydraulic system. So a lot of the trees that we saw this year, some went into early dormancy, and that's how they dealt with this stress. Now, when they lose their leaves, they go into this early dormancy. They're not functioning. Therefore, they're not going to be a benefit to us in the urban environment. They're not respirating. They're not absorbing carbon. Trees need to be fully functioning and fully active for them to be a benefit. So we're starting to understand why this happens. So some tree species have a drought mechanism to survive. That's all they're geared to do. So they would lose all their leaves because they're reducing the possibility of losing any further water from their system. So that's why they drop their leaves. Things in Juglanaceae, so the walnuts and the wing nuts, they're very sensitive to this, very sensitive to drought and heat stress. And they were the first trees this year that went into dormancy, and they just dropped all their leaves, and they make a risk assessment. They decide, can I survive now until the following spring? And that's what the trees have been doing. you have other trees that are very more adapted to a drier, warmer climate. They, through their morphology, so how the crown is formed, they generally have what we call guard leaves. So on the outside, the tree realizes those leaves aren't going to function for photosynthesis, but they're used in another really important thing, and that is shade. And they protect the leaves on the inner canopy to keep functioning. So they create their own microclimate to make sure that they can carry on photosynthesizing, and therefore they're a benefit and they're still functioning. So these sort of traits are what we're now looking at for species selection in the urban environment. And these are the things we need to get a better understanding. And it's really interesting when we look at trees, because what happens, I've got a colleague, Dr. Andrew Hirons, who is using things called dendrometers and also soil moisture sensors and sap flow. And now we can now identify when trees are heat stressed, what they actually do. When they close down, the timber actually shrinks, because what happens, it closes down the vessels. And when it does, it will sit it out throughout the hot period of the day. And we're now finding that come 8 o'clock in the evening, they're starting to kick in and start functioning again. And they're actually active right up to midnight. Now, these are things we didn't think happened. We thought that when there was no sun, there wasn't any photosynthesis, but it now looks as if trees are now have the ability to adapt. So they're the species we're trying to identify for future tree planting, especially in urban environments. And this is going to become more and more important. It's like I mentioned earlier, how scary it is when we're using these climate models about how it's going to change. Our treescape will change. We only, even using predicted models, we can already see, for instance, at Kew, there's 15% of our collection that probably won't be here in 2090. And this is the scary thing. We will lose tree species as we will, especially in the southeast. Like people, trees are naturally showing in the wild that they're naturally migrating, especially out in America as well. Their trees are naturally migrating to suitable ecotypes where they can survive, and it's quite alarming at the right speed it is now all moving forward. So for us, it's such an interesting time, and we just all need to remember that if we don't get this research off the ground and we don't understand, the urban canopy cover is quickly going to become barren, and it's going to become so more important. Things like the London plane, they are one of the best of trees adapted to deal with the urban environment. The issue we now have pests and diseases, especially out in Central Europe, that are a very big threat. So if we lose those trees, we now need to start thinking about what's going to replace them. So for us as urban dwellers, it's become more and more important.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. We have one more piece before we can open to the audience, both online and here in the hall. And this is to Makino-san, if I may. You spoke a little bit about the beneficial effects of wood. Could you tell us a little bit about the techniques and the tools which are used in allowing the preservation of these benefits?
はい、わかりました。そういった揮発成分を生かすには、これだけですね。塗装やサンディングをしないということです。
Yeah, how we go about conserving all of that is, all those benefits is through using wood in its unpainted, unsanded form.
で、サンディングっていうのは一般的にすごい馴染みのあることなんですけど、私が分析した結果の中では、サンディングで使う、ペーパーに使われている接着剤と木の成分が反応して、二次生成物としてトルエンという有害な物質が検出されました。
Sanding is something we're all used to, as is sandpaper. But in my analysis, I've discovered that the glue used in sandpaper actually reacts with some of the chemicals released by the wood to create toluene, which is a hazardous chemical.
そんな理由もあって、基本的には避けておいた方がいいっていうのが私の考えです。
Which is another reason why I think it's good to avoid sanding wood.
では、サンディングしないとどういった道具でやるべきかっていうところなんですが。
So what are we going to do if we can't sand the wood?
で、ハンドツールとしては、こういう昔からあるカンナとか、 下にあるのはそのカンナが、日本に入ってくる前に使われてたヤリガンナと言われるものですね。
Well, there are these hand tools that we can use, such as planes, kanna, and the tool on the left, yariganna, which was used in Japan before planes made it over to the country.
こういった道具を使って鋭利な刃物で、木材の表面を、カミソリで切るようにスパッと、滑らかにしてあげるっていうのがコツです。
These tools, the sharp blades, are used to shave off the surface of the wood, leaving a smooth surface.
で、一方で機械っていうのはどういったものがあるかって言いますと、
There are also some machines that can do the same thing.
こういったものがあるんですけど、これは基本的にカンナを少しだけ機械化したものです。
So these are automated planes.
調子上げっていうものは上盤にカンナの刃が、上向きについてて、その上を材料が通ることによってカンナ掛けができる機械です。
On the left, the super surfacer has a blade in the surface facing upward, and the material is then passed back and forth across that blade.
で、左側の、円盤ガンナっていうのは、丸い円盤のところにやはりカンナの刃が仕込まれていて、それが回転することによって、その回転しているものに材料を当てることで木を削ります。
And the disc planer has a rotating blade, so you hold the wood up against that to shave off the surface.
で、実際こういった道具を使うと、揮発成分を生かすことが可能です。
And this allows the wood to continue releasing those chemicals.
で、実際これは、宇藤杓子と呼ばれる、飛騨高山の民芸品です。
This is a handcrafted ladle from Hida Takayama.
で、この、材料はホウノキ、先ほど話が出たホウノキという木材で作られています。
It's made from magnolia wood.
で、実際、これは生の木から削り出しています。
And it's been carved out of natural wood.
で、実際刃物のみで仕上げて、サンディングも塗装もしてません。
It's been made just using a blade. There's no sandpaper and no paint and no coating involved.
で、これは、実際にあるご家庭で50年ほど使われてきた道具です。
And this one has been in use for 50 years.
今も使われています。
That family is still using it today.
実際そのサンディングすると僕らは滑らかに感じますけど、
When you use sandpaper, it feels smooth to the touch.
実際その水につけると木材の表面っていうのはザラザラになります。
But when it gets wet, you can feel that it's rough.
それは細かな繊維が起毛しているからです。
And that's all the little fibers standing up.
なので多くの木製品は水に接触する可能性のある木製品は必ず塗装がされています。
Which is why most products, if they're going to come into contact with water, are treated or coated.
でもこんな風に実際鋭利な刃物で削るだけをした道具っていうのは実際水につけても毛羽立ったりはしません。
But these spoons that are made just using a sharp blade, you don't get that roughness when they come into contact with water.
塗装の必要がないんです。
Which means you don't need to coat or paint them.
で、実際僕らの周りの家具というものは技術の進歩もあって多くのものがコンピュータ制御された機械で作られています。
Nowadays, with the progress of technology, a lot of our furniture is made by machine using computer-controlled machinery.
しかしご覧いただいてお分かりのように非効率だと言われているような道具でしか引き出せない木の魅力というか木の特性があります。
But as you've seen, there are some benefits of wood that we can only really achieve by using the traditional tools that were thought to be inefficient.
実際こういった道具、先ほど紹介した手道具というものはどんどん使われなくなりつつあるんですけど、そういったものが再び使われるようになったり、 私たちが、僕自身が進めている研究によって、新たな木材の活用が生まれることが、実際そういったところにつながって、森の活用というところまでうまく回っていくといいなっていうのが、私自身が感じていることです。
But I hope that these hand tools that are, the use of which is starting to die out will come back into use, and that these kinds of research will lead to new uses of wood and of the forests.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we can ask Makino-san to show us the use of the yariganna.
Yes.
The yariganna is a spear plane, yes, it was mentioned before. And you'll be able to see one in the exhibition as well. It's not something that is new to us either. We were working with Kose-san from Takayama City only a couple of weeks ago. He was a carpenter who also extolled the virtues of using the plane rather than sandpaper in order to protect the wood.
Okay.
Yes, please, please.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
ヤリガンナの、特徴というか、いいですか、説明させて。こういったカンナくずが特徴的な、ものが出ます。普通の大ガンナだと、もっと薄い、ビランとしたものが出るんですけど、こういうロール状になったものが出るっていうのが特徴です。
The yariganna gives a unique type of shaving. They create these spiral tubes rather than a regular plane where you tend to get a thinner, flatter shaving.
で、大ガンナが入ってくる前にこの道具がずっと使われてました。なので、木材の繊維に沿ってっていうところが非常に重要なんですけど、大ガンナのいいところっていうのは、大丈夫ですか？ OK。木材っていうのは、繊維があります。逆目とか、言われる言葉があるんですけど、目を起こしてしまう方向にどうしても加工しなきゃいけない時があります。逆目、繊維に対して、木の繊維、なんて言うんだろう。
Great.
斜めの対して起こすみたいな感じを逆目の方向にやることです。Okay.
So this is the type of plane that was used before regular planes came into Japan. And with this, you plane along the grain of the wood. Now, there are times when you need to plane in a way that sort of that diagonally, in a way that raises the fibers of the wood.
ヤリガンナはその逆目に対して、きれいに削ることができません。
And that when you have to do that, you can't do that with the yariganna.
大ガンナのが優れている。
The regular plane is much better at that kind of planing.
なので大ガンナが入ってきたらこれは使われなくなりました。
Which is why people stopped using this when the regular planes arrived in Japan.
なのでだんだんもう使う人もほぼいないんですけど、実際はこういった逆目というか、木目の方向さえ見極めて加工すればきれいに加工することができます。
Which is and which is why very few people nowadays use this type of yariganna. But as long as you keep an eye on the grain of the wood and know which direction you're meant to be planing in, then it's possible to use this where this is the best tool for the job.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a very rare occasion when we can see the use of the yariganna, actually, and there are very few people who can use it. So we're very, very privileged to have you, Makino-san, today. Thank you very much for your demonstration. I think we do have some time for some questions, if we may. I know that on Zoom, we have, thank you very much, and I will go straight to the question on Zoom. This is from Arman. This is for Makino-san, actually. You spend a lot of time in the forest. What is your favorite encounter with wildlife during your abundant time in the forest? And the reason I'm asking is with love from Pakistan, it says. So.
あります。エピソードか。毎日僕は自分の、森を歩いています。
I'm sure I can think of a story. I walk in the forest near my home every day.
そのうち、10回に1回ぐらいは獣というか大型の動物の気配を感じます。
And I suppose one time in 10, I will sense the presence of a larger animal.
鹿だったり、イノシシだったり。
Maybe a deer or a boar.
たまにリスも見かけます。イギリスの皆さんはリスが身近にいるので、ちょっと僕はびっくりしたんですけど。
Occasionally a squirrel. I couldn't believe how common it is to see squirrels here.
僕の周りの森には寄ってくるリスはいません。
Squirrels do not come up to you in the forest near my house.
みんなさっと逃げてしまいますので。
They run away.
Thank you very much, Arman from Pakistan. We have actually another question. This is from Aisha. This is maybe for both of you. Makino-san and Kevin, maybe. What is your favorite tree?
私の好きな木。私の好きな木は今僕が研究している姫小松っていう木が好きです。
My favorite tree is the one I'm researching right now, the Japanese white pine.
For me, mine's the chestnut leaf oak. So the reason why that is because when I first started my job at Kew, it was it is the biggest tree at Kew by volume. So it's 38 meters tall and approximately the same in canopy width. So yeah, purely from that sense, that's always been my favorite because it was so daunting to climb. And that's what led me on to do what I do now, because that tree proves when we get species selection, how successful something can grow. So that tree's from northern Iran and it's right by, it grows out in the mountains there. So for us as a changing climate for London, that is perfect. So in that tree, it was originally planted in 1843 by William Hooker, our first director, and it's still actively growing now, which is quite outstanding. And that tree is now the European champion. So it's the biggest tree of its kind within Europe in a garden. So it's, yeah, one of our big, impressive landscape trees.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions in? We do. If you could put your hand up so I could see where you are. Oh, and if somebody, thank you very much. We will go with this lady over here. If you could speak into the microphone, thank you.
Thank you. It's a question with regards to furniture making. What is your favorite type of species and what is the minimum number of years before it is felled?
僕が好きな木はだんだん変わってきてます。
My favorite tree for making furniture has actually changed.
以前は奈良です、多く。
It used to be oak.
最近は、栗、
Recently, I like chestnut
そして先ほど出たホウノキ。
and magnolia that came up in the,
で、今
in this
研
book,
究してる姫小松。
and the white pine that I'm researching.
なぜなら、我々の、僕が住んでる周りにその木がたくさんあるからです。
And that's just because there are a lot of those trees near where I live.
で、実際その周りにある木と同じ木で、木材を使って家具を作ることによって、実際それを室内に入れるので、森にいるような環境が室内に作れるんじゃないかっていうふうに思ってて、だんだんそういった自分が興味持つ木が変わってきてます。
And the reason I like using the wood from the same trees as are in my local area is because it feels like I'm bringing the forest inside.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Do we
あ、
have-
何歳かっていうのは、ちょっと実際はわからない。うん。どこっていうのは、実際切ってみないと何歳かって厳密にはわからないんですよ、なかなか。だから、樹齢が何歳以上かとかっていうことをあんまり意識したことはありません。
In terms of the age of the trees, I don't actually know how old they are a lot of the time. You don't really know until you cut them how many years they've been growing for. So it's not something that I am usually aware of.
Okay, thank you. I know we have a gentleman whose hand has been with two fingers as you're showing. I can see. If you could wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. This one's addressed really to Kevin. I do a walk in London called the Street Trees of London, which is fascinating because I'm not an arborist, but I've had to learn a lot about trees. And if I had a penny for every Platanus ex Hispanica or London plane I've seen, I'd be a rich man. Now, they were planted a long time ago and seem to be very fashionable. You've already mentioned that they have this end of lifespan. Can you see which tree might be the future perfect tree for the London cityscape?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And it's actually one I got asked the other week. It's a difficult one to sum up because there's lots of multiple issues that every tree has. A London plane, a lot of people moan about the pollen and the hairs that come off it, and it causes people to have respiratory issues. The problem is they're so well adapted to the urban environment. One of the trees currently that would prove to be a very good replacement is the new Ulmus New Horizon, the new elm, which is been bred, so it's resistant to Dutch elm disease. We've grown it at Kew. We brought it in as extra heavy standard. It's very well to establish. It's extremely drought tolerant due to its vessel size and the multiple vessels it has. So yeah, going forward, the best we could probably get it currently, it would be the New Horizon elm. But you then got really exciting species out there. For instance, things like Zelkova carpinifolia, which is the Corsican elm. That's would be a magnificent street tree, but again, it has quite fluting buttresses. So that is the conflict between the urban landscape, is trying to choose a tree that's, tree officers or tree managers want everything. They know what you get. You've always got conflicts between the highways and the tree people, and it's really hard to find trees that aren't going to produce loads of buttressing, so then you get pavement bust. But currently the New Horizon elm seems to be the best suited.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I can see so many hands going up here, and there have been so many questions online as well. I think I'm going to take one from online, and then for those of you who want to be able to ask questions after the event, I'm sure our speakers will stay around for a short while. But this is just one from that's come online. Thank you so much for this enlightening couple of presentations. and for all of your important work, both of you. This is really for Makino-san, though. However, for a furniture maker and forest enthusiast planning a research trip to Japan, can you reckon any places to visit to gain experience? I can imagine there's one place.
Just come visit me.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. I think that's probably very good. So thank you indeed to Makino Yoshiyuki and Kevin Martin, and of course, Bethan Jones for your interpretation. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody here as well. If you'd like to listen to today's talk again, you can do so online on the recording, which will be archived on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. And we will also be sending everybody who's taken part today a short feedback form. If you could complete that, that would be very, very appreciated, because of course, by doing that, we can continue to do events like this in the future. If you haven't seen it already, we have the Carpenters Line Woodworking Heritage in Hida, Takayama, where of course Makino-san is from. So you'll be able to go and visit him there as well. Next time, now that of course traveling to Japan is so much easier. And this goes on until the 29th of January. After this, we have a film as well called Carving the Divine Buddhist Sculptors of Japan. I know that there may be a few spaces left if you're willing to go into our waiting list line. A very, very good film indeed. That starts at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you once again to Makino-san and to Kevin. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.